Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's having a good day. I came on today to tell my story and to hopefully help someone that's experienced the same things that I went through. And it's taken me 57 years to express my story. And I wrote it kind of down because it's a bit overwhelming. And I figured by writing it down, it would help me hold back the tears of some of the things I'm about to share with you. So I want to start off by saying that my goal for this YouTube channel is to provide hope of survival and educate those who are experiencing some form of domestic violence abuse through my own personal story. Not many people are aware that domestic violence is including physical, emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual abuse. There's an increase of domestic violence in America. 1 in 4 women experience some form of domestic violence or abuse by a current or former partner. But abuse can be from others, such as grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, siblings, adult children, and even neighbors. My own personal story of surviving domestic violence took me 57 years to feel comfortable enough to share in hopes that my story will help others who have similarities of abuse. This is a serious issue in our society, and if I can help someone break free from the abuse, then I know I've done my part to help another person. This is an issue that is complicated and has many false misconceptions of why victims return to their abusers. When leaving an abuser, it takes time, planning, and strategy to ensure your own safety. Also, it takes help from your community organizations and family members who you can trust to protect you when it's time to leave your abuser. In the description, I've given a national hotline, domestic violence hotline. If you need to use it, by all means, use it at any time. It's a 24-hour service. My story of domestic violence abuse begins as a young child. I want to give you an overview of my background so you get an idea of how it all started for me. My mother was such a giving woman and struggled with her own limitations. See, my mother suffered from mental illness, as did her mother. She was a little girl when her mother disappeared and it was never to be seen again. Her father worked in a brewery and became a functioning alcoholic. My mother had to step up and take care of her little brother and father at a young age. My mother met my father in her 20s and they got married and had 3 girls. I was the youngest of the 3 girls. I grew up in a strong Italian Catholic household. Later, my mother had been extremely stressed, and when she was taking her medication, she functioned normally, like many mothers do. When I was 8 years old, my mother went off her medication, and she thought she was Jesus and paced in the backyard in an evening gown. It was difficult to see growing up. My mother slipped a couple times, but not taking her medication throughout my life, and every time she slipped, it was always worse than the previous time. My father had my mother committed to a mental institution. The sheriffs came out and put my mother in handcuffs like a criminal and drove her to the mental hospital to have further evaluations. I didn't see my mother for almost a month until she returned home. I remember so many times when my mother was there for me and the kids. She brought gifts for the kids at Christmas time because I had left their abusive father and was finally in an apartment of my own. I didn't have much money, and my mother and brother My mother and her brother came through for the kids so they would have something to open at Christmas time. My mother was loving and generous numerous of times, and I didn't feel worthy being alive. I promised my mother I would be there for her whenever she needed me. When my mother got older and my middle sister gained guardianship of my mother after she divorced my father, oftentimes my mother would tell my middle sister she needed food and to bring her some food, but my sister would go days without bringing my mother any food. So I asked my mother to make a list of food that she wanted to eat, and I went out and bought her groceries. My mother and I would talk every day on the phone. When I came back home in 2005, one day she didn't answer for a few days in a row, and I thought it was strange. So I went to her home only to find out she was in the hospital. I called her room to find a man answer her phone in the room where my mother was supposed to have been. I said, "Where the hell is my mother?" I drove up to her house only to find out from her neighbor that my mother had died. My sister didn't have the guts to call me and let me know. I'm not surprised because she did the same thing to me when my father died a few years earlier. My father's story. My father was a strong Italian Catholic man who worked as a police officer all his life. He served in the United States Air Force and had honorable discharge from the military when he met my mother in her 20s. My father was the disciplinary in our family and often punished me with the bamboo back scratcher with the jade handle. I was born left-handed. Oftentimes at dinner, I was smacked and sent to my room without dinner for picking up a fork with my left hand, all because my father thought the world was meant for right-handed people. I was expected to clean the whole house when my middle sister only had to do the dishes. When I expressed my feelings of how unfair that it was, I was beaten and thrown down the basement stairs. I was told if I wanted a good life, I better marry a rich man. I was told never to date outside my race, and if I brought someone home that was different race, my father stressed, "Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out." I disappointed and shamed my father often by my behavior and choices I made in life. Early on as a child, I would do anything just to get my father to accept me like he did my middle sister. My father never told me he loved me until I was 19 years old. He said he didn't feel he needed to tell me, but I was to know he did by providing a roof over my head, clothes on my back, food to eat, and a good school to attend. My father being a police officer wasn't easy. When I was 8 years old, our house was broken into while we were at school. When I came home, our family dog was locked in the bedroom, and my mother and father's room was torn apart like someone was looking for something. Because my father always wanted our house to be clean, I picked everything up and put it back where it all belonged. I found out by doing that, the police couldn't get a fingerprint in the room. I carried that shame and grief for years and blamed myself for the police not being able to get who caused the break-in. Whoever caused the break-in came back again, only to see footprints outside the window, walking down the backyard. My father for a while had a shotgun next to his chair and stated, "If someone comes and shoots out the house, get down on the floor and stay down." Sorry guys, The police wanted to make certain we were all okay, so we had a police escort back and forth to school for protection. Our family was threatened. My mother and 2 sisters and I had to be hidden and attended another school until they determined it was safe again to return home. With my father being a police officer, I never had any real friends growing up because they said I would tell on them because of their bad behavior. When I was around 12 years old, I would wake up in the middle of the night hearing my father hit my mother, and I would hear her cry. So I would often stay up at night rearranging my room just to keep my father from hitting my mother. It would never happen if myself or my sisters were up. I had 2 sisters. My older sister was 4 years older than me, and my middle sister was 3 years older than me. When I was 14 years old, my middle sister, who was 3 years older, then dated a guy who she later dumped. But when he called her multiple times, it turned out I would be the one answering the phone. So we ended up talking and became friends. Then we dated after she dumped him. I thought my father would approve because he didn't question my sister when she dated him. Still being with the same guy, I turned 16. We were over at his house in his rec room. We got to fooling around, and the first time I ever did anything sexually, I had no idea what I was doing. I got pregnant. A few months later, I started getting sick and had no idea why. So I was called down to the nurse's office at my school, and she called my mother, and my mother said I was pregnant. I had no idea because sex was never talked about in my strong Catholic family. I attended Catholic school my whole life up until that point and was never talked about in school back then. Well, I disgraced my family by being a teenage mother. My high school principal kicked me out for being a teen mother and said I wasn't setting a good example for the other students who attended the school. I shamed my family once again for being a high school dropout and a teen mother. It wasn't in my religion to have an abortion, even though his father wanted me to get one. He said I would be destroying his son's life if I had the baby. During the time my mother and father's marriage was falling apart and divorce was imminent, the pastor at my church would not marry us like traditional wedding, so I had to get married in my mother and father's house. My father put demands on his family by limiting his family attendance because there was not much room for them to all attend at our house. Well, he was a big family, 9 brothers and sisters, and other siblings from that. That was like a sword in the heart of his father when his father limited their family, when my father limited his father's family attendance. His father ignored the request my father stated, and brought more family members than they were supposed to. So an argument broke out, and that was the beginning of my wedding. By the time I was 18, we were divorced and shared a baby girl. A couple years later, he told me that my father had told his father if he didn't marry me, he would get him for statutory rape. Great, take the G off. My marriage to him never stood a chance. 3 years later, I started dating again, a guy who I thought was a really nice guy, but he had a father who was an alcoholic and never liked me. I had a daughter from another man, and was young. But we still dated. We would take drives in the country just to get away from all the negative people in our lives. His father always told him to enlist into the Army and make something of himself. He enlisted, and during boot camp, he called for me to come down to his location and get married by the Justice of the Peace. And we would go to Germany and live our lives. At the time, it seemed like a great idea for a new beginning. Later, it was said to me that he would go over to Germany first and get established, and then send for me to live on the base. He informed me that I would have to stay back and just for a short while when he would send for me. But one day I got a letter from one of his Army buddies who shared his barracks with him, and had told me in a letter he wasn't being faithful at all and had cheated on me with the girl whose family was already over there staying in the family barracks. He also stated that my husband said I was a mistake and he should have never married me. That broke my heart because I waited for him for over 2 years without him while he was in Germany seeing another girl. I never saw him again. This left a strong emotional disappointment in my life once again, feeling like I was not worthy of any kind of love. Because he was on active duty, it was difficult for me to get a divorce from him. But a year later, I was allowed to get a divorce so I could move on with my life. The next man I got involved with, I thought perhaps I needed a man more mature. He was drafted into the Vietnam War in 69 to 71 and served for a few years before he was injured and had an honorable discharge. He was previously married to a woman who cheated on him with her sister's husband, so he divorced her. They shared 3 children together. When we met in 1982, he was 13 years older than me. He was very charming, romantic towards me, but always opened my car doors, giving me flowers on special occasions. We loved shooting pool together and oftentimes went to a diner near his work and would compete with other pool players after his work shift. We had so much fun. He made me feel like I was appreciated for who I was. We got married and had 2 sons, and it was great for a short time. He began to drink Jack Daniels, and it made him mean. All the fun and romance was gone because he became physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive. When I felt I wanted to leave him because the abuse had gone on for over 4 years, he would tell me, "No man will ever want you with someone else's kids." I was no good, and every time I moved, he would beat me. After his abuse, he would always apologize and tell me it will never happen again. But every time he drank, the abuse began again. I almost lost both my sons during birth because of all his abuse. My oldest son I delivered on my knees because the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. My youngest son, I had surgery in California when I was 6 months pregnant for him. He would beat me because he said my youngest wasn't his because he had gotten a vasectomy. I later found out that was a lie. He cheated on me multiple times while I was in the hospital having his sons. His daughter from a previous marriage encouraged him to cheat because she wanted her dad back with her mom. So let me back up a bit. We moved a few times because after he started drinking, he couldn't keep a job. When he got drunk, he would think he was back in Vietnam. The doctors called this the Vietnam syndrome. So if I moved he would shoot me, and oftentimes he had a shotgun and would wave it in front of my face. I was so scared and I didn't even know what to do. We went to a marriage counselor because after having 2 failed marriages, somehow I was already blaming myself for this marriage going wrong. The drinking still persisted. He couldn't keep a job. Sorry, just... So I got a job working at a local dealership as a receptionist. He would come into the dealership screaming and demanding to speak with me after a night of abuse. He once again told me how sorry he was for hitting me and promised not to do it again. At this point, I'm numb to all his lies. My manager told me to go out to talk to him and get him to leave because he was disrupting the business and causing a scene. This happened a couple times. He didn't like me working with many salesmen because he thought I was cheating on him. So it made him so mad, he began to drink again until he was drunk. So after work, I picked up the kids from the babysitters and was on my way to my mom's house to let her know what had happened. And on my way to my mom's house, the road that I was on had a speed limit of 45 miles per hour. He had followed me from the babysitters and going to my mom's house, and he got his car in front of mine going 45 miles an hour, and he slammed on his brakes, making me almost hit him in the back of his car. So I slammed on my brakes trying to avoid hitting his car. It would have been bad because the kids were in the car with me and they would have been seriously harmed. The next day, after dropping the kids off at the babysitters, I went to work and was glad to get away from him, giving me some space. When I arrived at work, my boss called me in his office and let me know he was letting me go because he couldn't allow my husband to come back into work and cause a disruption again. When I got home, he was setting all our stuff out of our house outside, having a yard sale, and said we were moving to California. At this point, my daughter was about to be 5 years old. My oldest son was almost 1.5 years, and I was pregnant with my youngest son. We drove all the way to California and stayed in a motel and had 1-room apartment. The abuse continued, and I began having serious abdominal pain while being pregnant with my youngest son. The ambulance brought me into the hospital, and the nurses are wheeling me into the operating room, telling me they will do whatever it takes to keep the baby safe, but their main concern was me. After surgery, they removed a cyst from my bowels. They had given me a spinal tap, but my spine ended up leaking, and I had severe headaches and pain. I couldn't move. After a few days in the hospital, I was concerned about my son and daughter being left alone with him. I called my daughter's father to fly her home for her own safety. It was the hardest thing I had to do, was give up custody of her, but her safety meant more to me than the custody of her. I felt like a failure all over again. More brainwashing. Well, I was discharged from the hospital. They gave me a nurse for 2 weeks to stay with me, to help me recover and take care of my son. I think they wanted to observe what was really going on, as well as help me recover from the surgery. The nurse kept him busy so I could call my mom and asked her for money so I could go back home. My mother sent money, and we drove back home. I had to tell him my mom was going to help me recover further, and the nurse had to go. My mom and I came up with a game plan so I could leave him and divorce him without further harm to me or my son. At this point, I was about 6 months pregnant with my youngest son, and my mom was going to help me. He couldn't argue with my mom. She wouldn't allow it in her home. When it was time to leave him, the only plan was to go to my older sister and stay in her basement until I got on my feet. But what I didn't know is she had the same mental illness as my mother had. One night, living with my oldest sister, her family, it was beginning of the month, and I was on public assistance, and she made me give her rent plus all my food stamps just staying at her place. She came running down the basement stairs, swearing at me in front of my son, saying I took her medication out of her medicine cabinet. And when I told her I didn't touch her medication, she didn't believe me and kicked us out at 1 a.m. with nowhere to go. I stayed in my car with my son with no money or food stamps because I had given it all to her for rent. I had given birth to my youngest son by this time alone. And when I got out of the hospital, my mom took me downtown to file for emergency assistance to get an emergency voucher so I could get an apartment of my own. I found an apartment manager who would finally take the voucher to stay in a 1-bedroom apartment. Finally, I was on my own, felt safe for me and the kids, but it was still difficult month to month because after paying all the bills, I wouldn't have anything left for any extra necessities for me and the kids. I swore I would never marry again because my track record with men was horrible and terrifying, to say the least. I needed time to heal from the relationships I blamed myself. I'm sorry, guys, I have people around me, and this is kind of a bit touching. So I needed to have time to heal from the relationships. I blamed myself. I was ashamed and embarrassed of all I had been through. I began working on taking care of me and my sons and focused on us for a while. A few years later went by. I swore I'd never get married again after my 3rd marriage of domestic violence abuse. In 1989, I met a man over the phone who would call me regularly at work. He was so nice and very charming and romantic, but after I got to know him over 2 years, sorry guys, I'm sorry, it's just I'm sorry, there's just it's kind of personal and there's too many people walking by. So in 1989, I met a man over the phone who would call me regularly at work. He was so nice and very charming and romantic, but after I got to know him over 2 years, I still couldn't stop remembering how my last relationship was so charming and romantic, and then it went dark at the end. I purposely put him through so much and so many ups and downs just to see if he would pass the test of a true boyfriend and still stay, and he still stayed with me. I approached this relationship differently than all the others. We had great communication with one another, unlike my past relationship. Plus, I wasn't too worried because he had lived in another state. He would send me little gifts to show his appreciation of our friendship. We got to know each other very well, and we became best friends. I never had a relationship like this before. He bought my son's first bikes. He was so generous and thoughtful. 1.5 years into knowing one another, he sent me a suction cup Ninja Turtle because he knew my sons would love it. Meanwhile, I let my sons play with it. A couple of days later, he told me to look at the turtle more closely. So when I got back home from work, I looked at the turtle and saw it was a little opened on the side and felt something inside the turtle. But what I didn't know is he opened it up on the side and wrapped a carat diamond engagement ring in the turtle and sewed it back up. I had never seen such a beautiful ring in my entire life. I was stunned again at his kindness and caring heart, but I sat down and thought our relationship would go to the next level if I accepted the ring. Keep in mind, I hadn't met him physically yet, but I felt like I knew him very well after talking on the phone for over 1.5 years. I finally arranged to meet him physically, but still wasn't sure about this relationship and was thinking about giving him the ring back. So he drove to my state by surprising me with a metallic midnight blue with T-tops 442 Oldsmobile and handed me the key on a gold keychain that said, "I love you." Sorry. Once again, I was floored, and no one had ever done anything like that for me before. I kind of let him know I wasn't ready for the next level because I had been hurt so many times in the past. I thought he would do the same thing to me. It was in my head, the scars that plagued my mind from all the previous relationships and the abuse. He ended up getting a hotel room and called me crying from heartbreak. I later got a call from the police. He was trying to kill himself over the disappointment of me letting him down. I guess he didn't expect me telling him I didn't want to take the relationship to the next level. We had such great communication for 1.5 years and talking on the phone, getting to know one another. I still felt bad and never wanted to hurt him. I was just so scared from my past. I went to the hotel room where, excuse me. I went to the hotel room where he was staying and called his parents because I didn't think he could fly back alone. They came to my state to get him. We continued to talk on the phone another 6 months, and I decided to give him a chance. But I told him my sons would have to agree on our relationship. The boys loved him and agreed they wanted him to be their stepdad. He drove back to my state, and we were married in 1991. He was so proud of our relationship, and yet I was still very scared and reserved from my past. After we married, me and the boys moved to his state where we resided for over 16 years. I had never had a close family, and he lived next door to his mother and father, and his brother and wife lived on the other side of us. His mother and father were so generous, and I saw where he got that. His mother and father asked us to choose the house we wanted to have when we got married. I was so shocked, but really didn't know what that all meant, but saw it as incredibly generous. The house we chose was his grandparents' house, and were no longer alive. But his mother had a lot of her things left in the house because she didn't have room to put it all in her house. We started out our marriage physically getting to know one another when his mother just walked in on us. I felt so embarrassed and found it difficult to face her after that. She tried so hard to make me feel like a part of the family that became too pushy. Keep in mind, I had never had a close family, and I didn't know how to react to their closeness. She would come into the basement without letting us know. I had no idea it was going to be like it did. I asked him if he would talk to his mother and let her know next time when she needed to come over. It seemed like I was ridiculous for excuse me. It seemed like I was being ridiculous for suggesting such a thing by her demeanor, but she began to call him to let him know she was coming over, but he would never say anything to me ahead of time. Then I caught him in a couple of lies after we had long talks over the phone about important topics. Well, that was it. I thought, here we go again. It's starting all over again. My past relationships. The first 5 years, we just couldn't see eye to eye. My thoughts were, how could we talk and get to know one another for 2 years? And I thought I could trust him. He was my best friend. My daughter at this time wanted to come back and live with me because she was with her father, and she stated he was being abusive. So my husband built a bedroom for her in our house so she could come and live. In the beginning, it was good, but she was turning 16 and was hanging around the wrong people, and we wanted to protect her. She would slip out her window after 10 p.m. and go over to her girlfriend's house, which was in a bad area. So we punished her for slipping out late at night. She became unruly and wouldn't follow our rules. One day she slipped out again, and we called the police because we didn't know where she was. That late at night, cops grabbed her and wanted to bring her home, but she told the cops that we were abusive and she didn't want to come home. So in this state, we're responsible for her up until she turns 21. The cops took her to a mental hospital to be evaluated based on what she was saying to the cops. She still refused to come home, so they told us she had to go to a group home to be further evaluated. The hospital that she was at was only for adults, so I had to sign the paperwork to get her admitted because she refused to come home. She claimed they abused her in the group home and called her dad and told her dad we signed her over to be abused in the group home, and that her and my husband were abusing her as well. And that started her father and I arguing, and he didn't want to hear the truth of why she was there. I signed over custody to her father again, and she moved back home to live with her stepmother. Our relationship was never the same again after the entire ordeal. My youngest son was diagnosed with ADD. He had spray painted my metallic midnight blue 442 Oldsmobile with bright yellow paint and the foundation of our home. We enrolled him in therapy until he was 18 years, just to help him in school and to help him manage the ADD diagnosis. When he was 10, a boy in the neighborhood was at the park behind our house and picked up a dirty beer bottle took an M80 firework, lit it, stuck it in a dirty beer bottle, and threw it at my son's face. He came running home with his eye hanging out of his face. I spent the next few years in and out of hospitals and doctor visits while attending school to get my degree. He eventually lost his eye. Later, I had to press charges against the boy and his mother because he was underage. The cops said he was known for setting a dog on fire, and they had multiple calls to his home for his bad behavior. We had to make sure that this boy didn't attend the same class as my son for my son's safety. My oldest son was an introvert, didn't talk much. When people talked to him, he wouldn't respond. He struggled with this for quite a few years, and he couldn't keep his relationships with his peers struggled. So for a short time, we enrolled him into counseling to get to the bottom of his dysfunctional behavior. That lasted around 4 years. One day I decided to surprise my husband at work and at his company. And his company was getting ready to have a barbecue for the contractors to encourage more sales and to thank them for their sales. And I caught him flirting with the sales girl in the showroom, getting close and chummy. Well, I never pulled into the shop, but I saw him from across the street. He liked what she was wearing just by the chummy behavior she was displaying. His company would often hold hotel meetings in regards to updates on their 401k plans. I found out he had met another girl there and used his meeting at work to get close to another girl. I knew then our marriage was dwindling. Throughout our marriage, it slowly dwindled to such emptiness that neither one of us could stand and to be around each other. He never hit me. He always came home after work, but we were so distant one another in our own home. We decided to go to marriage counseling, but it won't work if we both don't give it a try. And I think he had had enough. At the end, he finally gave me an ultimatum to either choose him or my sons. I couldn't believe he had given me an ultimatum after everything I had been through with him. I chose my sons and moved back home. After my daughter was in her 20s by now, she was married and had 2 kids. I thought we had healed our struggles with each other. She began telling me my middle sister was abusing my mother. My daughter also told me that her husband began taking heroin and would steal her car so she couldn't go to work. She often found dirty needles on the back seat floorboard where she was buckling the kids on the back seat. So when we came up with the plan for me to come home, I would help her get a car that he couldn't steal, a home that she no longer had to rent. I wanted to mend our relationship by helping her and also checking on my mother, who my middle sister was abusing. So I came home to check on the situation. I bought a car, left it in my name so her husband couldn't take it. I had a tracker put on the car, so if he did take the car, we could track his whereabouts. I bought a home for her and the kids to stay. They had a big backyard to play in with plenty of space for them. It would help her not to miss any more work. So we came up with the plan for him not to know where we lived in the new home because he was in jail for stealing his mother's washer and dryer. for heroin. So I thought the plan was working. I got the car, I got the home, and she wasn't telling him where we were living. Then she says she wanted to go visit him with the kids in jail. So then she says she wanted to go visit him with the kids while he was in jail. I told her it wasn't a good idea, but she went anyway. Well, that was the start of more drama. When he got out of jail, she picked him up and brought him to the house that I bought and wanted him to stay with us to help us out in the home. I told her no, it wasn't a good idea. We argued in the front yard when he was getting out of the car. And I was so mad because I did all this for her and she broke the plan. I went to grab her shoulders to make her see what she was doing wasn't good, and the edge of my ring scratched the side of her face. Well, then she began punching me in the face and began wrestling me in the front yard. And he called the cops. They told the cops that it was me who started the fight, and they took me to jail, leaving both of them and my oldest son staying in my house. She filed a restraining order on me so I couldn't return back to my home. She and her husband went through my home, stealing some of my things, of which she says she didn't, but my pink sapphire diamond ring was missing. And my son's friend had gone through my office and took one of my checks from my other home with my husband and stole $400 from that account. So I filed an eviction to get them out of my home. I had to stay in an extended stay apartment because I wasn't allowed to return home until she and her husband and my son had left my home. A few years later, I found out she was doing heroin right alongside him the whole time. The time away from my husband made him really think about our separation, and he came back to my hometown, got me out of jail because my daughter and son left me in jail over a $129 bond. I was so appreciative of him driving all the way from our home in another state just to get me out of jail. He was so mad at my daughter for what she had done, and to this day, she's never apologized for what she did, and I don't believe she will. I lost my degree because I wasn't allowed to have any convictions on my record, or it would destroy me being able to be bonded working for major companies. So my relationship with my daughter is no more. We do not speak. We do not see each other. And we haven't seen each other ever since. I needed to experience some fun because my husband never wanted to do anything with me for fun. We always stayed at home. When we went to the malls to shop, he would always walk behind me. My husband and I had been through so much that it was difficult to mend so much. After 16 years of marriage, we divorced. In 2005, while I was separated from my husband, and after getting my house back, the neighbor welcomed me to the neighborhood by bringing a pizza over. My husband at the time was there and didn't like him, but observed his behavior at the time. The neighbor would come over and often suggest we go to the local pub and shoot some pool. After getting to know the neighbor, we started going out more. My son never liked him. The neighbor claimed he was a widow after a couple years, and he had a daughter from their marriage. He claimed she was so drunk that she died choking on her own vomit. He said he had stepped over her to call the cops, Later, I found out she wasn't happy with him and wanted to leave him, and their marriage was going bad as well. I later realized from other neighbors they could hear the arguing over periods of time that they thought he killed her by choking her to death. My youngest son felt bad for his daughter, and they became good friends. My youngest son was still struggling from the loss of his eye, and he had his own way of dealing with his demons. So they shared each other's stories and became even better friends. Meanwhile, the neighbor and I were going more and more to the pub and shooting pool. It was so much fun in the beginning. It was an escape for me from all the drama I had experienced for over 40 years in my life. I needed to have some fun for a change after everything I'd been through. I found out later the neighbor was all fake as well. One night I went to the bar without him, and he had a cop friend get me for driving intoxicated, while though my home was one street away. He was jealous that I went without him. He would threaten my youngest son about his daughter and him being friends. He came over one day drunk and mad. He forced his way in my home, pushed me into the kitchen, and knocked me down, hitting the back of my head hard on the kitchen table, and began choking me to the point I almost passed out. I kicked him off me and pushed him out of my house. The next day, I went downtown to press charges of assault and got a restraining order on him for 5 years. So the neighbor went into criminal court in front of the judge and lied straight to the judge. I obtained a court transcript and presented it to the judge, in which I was obtaining a restraining order on him. I proved he couldn't be trusted, because if he could lie to a criminal judge with no problem, he would lie to a civil judge. And I was immediately granted 5 years restraining order, and the judge didn't want to hear anything he had to say. We no longer speak or see each other. And in 2007, I got my divorce from my husband. My husband and I had been through so much. It was difficult to move forward together. I will always have love for him in my heart, but I am not in love with him, and we no longer talk. I still have his phone number, but we have never talked since his mother's funeral many years ago. I have been single for over 17 years. I've had no dates, no other relationships with anyone since. I decided to take the time to do some self-reflecting on my own issues from the beginning of my childhood to all my relationships. I often felt not worthy of living and being a failure, not only to myself, but to my kids. I felt shamed. I felt shameful and embarrassed of how I lived my life. Looking back now, I know all this was for a reason, and it was to help someone else who has or is experiencing domestic violence abuse of any kind. I feel confident and blessed by God. I am worthy, and I now love myself. I am definitely one of a kind, and I am favored by God, because He wants me to speak to others who are struggling and help them be a survivor just like I am. I am a true survivor. And that is my true story. That is my truth. And I hope y'all can understand where I came from, how I ended up in the relationships that I did. And I hope that my message today will help someone out there who's experiencing the same thing. So with that said, I am a survivor, and I thank you all for taking the time to hear my story. And I wish you all the best. And I love you guys. And that's my truth. Thanks for listening. You all have a wonderful day.